Get to some other callers. We got James in Kansas City. Thanks for waiting.
Hi. How you guys doing?
All right.
I'm exhausted.
I understand. Jen, happy Mother's Day.
Thank you.
Very thrilled for you. Thank you for all you do.
I'm a mother
being
too,
mother.
just not of the same type.
I've heard you've been called a mother something many a times. That's a whole other conversation. I have two things that I wanted to get to if we have time. If not, I completely understand. First, I recently had a son, and
Congrats.
he's a month. Thank you.
It's a good thing you didn't have a daughter. Oh, I'm sorry. I was still in Bible mode.
Yes, we're not back on slavery, hopefully. But he's about a month old, and I've didn't really give much thought to religion one way or the other. I guess you'd call me a non-believer, but as Jen can probably attest to, when the baby isn't sleeping, you will turn to anything to get them to sleep, and especially when you're sleep deprived. I turned to prayer, just a general prayer. I don't know particular God in mind, and I started flipping through the internet and found your show. Well, every time your show comes on and Matt starts speaking, the baby falls asleep.
Okay.
Like clockwork. So I don't know if that makes Matt a god or God answering a prayer, but for whatever reason, every time your show comes on, I put it on for him, he falls asleep, guaranteed.
Cool.
Would you consider that a proof of God?
I'd love to go along with the joke and say yes, but I won't.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of those things. I mean, obviously I put a little bit of satire in it, but it is one of those things that I had no other recourse, and I didn't, and I kind of fell back on original learning about the teachings and all of that, and kind of saying,
Well, babies love me in general, and I think it's because they think we have the same barber. But for whatever reason, I've had many people hand me their child, and it just falls right asleep. Mm-hmm. I'm glad that doesn't happen to the people on the other side of the glass, or I'd have to quit the show. But yeah, babies, cool. Get some rest.
Yeah, I don't, like I said, it's one of those things where I'm not 100% sure what it is, if it's your soothing voice or whatever, but he falls asleep every time you're on, and I don't understand it. The second point that I wanted to ask about was, Matt, I had heard on a few of your episodes, you said that it is not an atheist's job for proof against God.
Correct.
Although you could do it, but I've never actually heard you do it, and I apologize if you have it in another episode or something I've never seen. But can I actually hear your argument for against God?
No. So here's the thing, and I will try to do this as quickly as possible, mainly because I've talked a lot. It very much depends on which God we're talking about. But I'm writing a book called If I Were God. And one of the goals of this is to go through and show how the world that we live in doesn't make sense under almost any God proposition, that there's some conflict there no matter how we define God, unless we define God as just, kind of like, if it's so ill-defined that it could be anything. So there's the weak atheist position of, I do not believe that a God exists, which it probably better phrased, I am not convinced that God exists. Then there's the strong atheist position, which is, I am convinced that God does not exist. And those are subtly different. It's the difference between I'm convinced you're guilty and I am not convinced that you are innocent. That type of thing.
Right.
The way I look at it is this: if you take we know that all the claims about various gods can't be true because they are in contradiction with each other. And so we need some way to delineate which of them might be true, or which of them, if any, is true. Now, most of them have this idea of a God that, for all the ones that have the idea of a God that cares about us and has some important message for us, those gods don't exist. Because if they existed, that would be in conflict with the fact that there's so much confusion about which God exists. It would be very easy for a God to reveal himself or herself to everyone. And the fact that this hasn't happened means there isn't a God that actually cares about clarity about the God question. So that throws out all of the organized religions. That throws out most conventional, nominal, classical theism versions of religion and God. And it ties in with essentially the argument from divine hiddenness, which I've talked about and actually have a video about on my channel as well. For the other type,
and I apologize, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, well, you can go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/sansdeity, or you can just Google Matt Dillahunty divine hiddenness, and you'll find the video. It goes into detail on that argument. So that leaves the non-interventionist gods, the deistic gods, the ones that may be malevolent or don't care about us or are intentionally hiding. And the thing is, a God that is intentionally hiding is, from our perspective, functionally identical to a God that doesn't exist. And so I can't demonstrate that that God doesn't exist because it's an unfalsifiable proposition. It's something that I could not possibly show the difference between. However, I don't need to, and it's not my problem, because I live in a world where those two things are logically equivalent. The deistic notion of a God, that there's a God who started everything off but doesn't intervene. There's no way for me to tell the difference between the universe I live in, to look at the universe I live in and determine whether it's the result of a God that started it off and doesn't intervene, or if there is no God that started it off and still doesn't intervene. And so from our standpoint, not only is the null hypothesis that there is no God, so we're starting off on good footing, the burden of proof hasn't been met for any of them. Most of them are in conflict with what we see and understand about the world. And therefore, I will not assert with, I don't claim absolute certainty about anything, but I think there's a reasonable confidence that no God that matters exists.
So is it harder for you to argue against just a deistic God than, like, say, the Christian God of the Bible and such like that?
Well, it's not so much that it's harder to argue against, it's that it's impossible to argue for. They are simultaneously, they are claiming to have detected the undetectable. They define it as undetectable. Here's a God that doesn't intervene, and yet they're claiming that they have good reason to accept that proposition. And that would be like saying, I have an undetectable raccoon in my garage, and I've detected it. I'm convinced that undetectable raccoon is in my garage. I mean, it's an utterly fallacious, it's an absurd proposition. And so I have no use for the deistic propositions, and I'm baffled quite often, and I know I cautioned against this, and it's potentially insulting. I find that people who are supporting a deistic notion as a fact, not as a gateway to atheism or a stopgap against religious intrusion in society, the people who are asserting it as a fact are wholly confused and quite often are terrified of the prospect of just simply acknowledging that they don't have good reason to believe a God exists.
It's kind of like the people that claim to be spiritual but not religious.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, Jack, what is your argument that for there not being a God, or are you along the same lines as Matt?
Yeah, I think Matt and I are actually in complete agreement on this. I mean, the burden of proof hasn't been met. At this point, I think that if when we looked in all the places where if a God exists, we should find evidence, and there is no evidence. At some point, I'm comfortable saying, hey, this particular God does not exist. In the case of the Christian God, I think that particular God cannot exist.
Although to be fair, there's not a Christian God.
That's true. Yeah,
there's almost as many ideas about a Christian God as there are Christians.
Yeah, so basically, I'd just be arguing...
Isn't that a fallacy of the people?
Well, so the thing is, if there's 100 people who tell me what they think the Christian God is, and they all present a model that is contradicted by observations, all 100 of them are wrong. To say that there might still be a Christian God that none of these 100 people were aware of, sure, I can't demonstrate that that's not the case, but what we can tell is that Christian God doesn't seem to care to clarify all this confusion about a God. And if every single person who's ever lived has been functionally wrong in their belief that a God exists, because they believe in it doesn't matter if there's some other God. If there's a God somewhere out there that nobody believes in and nobody has been arguing for, The time to believe it is after there's been a demonstration.
Yeah. Well, and there's this this saying that the theist God always hates all the same people that the theist hates, and the reason for
Funny how that
that,
works.
the reason for that is that it's coming right out of the theist's head,
And we're coming up on time. I want to try and get to a couple other callers, but thanks, James. Hey, quickly, what's the weather in Kansas City right now? Because that's home.
85 and sunny.
Cool.
All right.
Thanks. Yeah, I was born in the Kansas City area. Not that it matters to anybody else, but on occasion, because you know what? It's hot as hell in this studio right now. I don't know about you, but I'm like,
I dressed for the studio weather,
yeah.
so
I'm wishing I had a fan at this point. All right, so